Ever since chapter 1, Oda has in the original black and white manga used a very special grey tone to color Shanks' red hair. One Piece is actually full of different characters with red hair, yet for decades, Oda only reserved this special tone for Shanks' hair and colored every other red-haired character with a basic white tone. The only time this was ever changed was over 900 chapters into the story, when we were introduced to Shamrock's character, whose hair was given the same tone as Shanks, and now with the inclusion of their mother, in all of One Piece, there are literally just 3 characters whose hair is colored like this. What is also notable is that even though a lot of fan colorings gave Garling red hair like Shanks when he was first introduced, the manga never gave him the same hair color as the rest of his family, and the anime later confirmed that Garling in truth has blonde hair. You all probably now understand that Shanks and his family having red hair like this isn't just a random visual choice, but something extremely special, and I believe the reason why the story has made it so important is that Shanks' hair reveals his true lineage from his mother's side, which is even more important than his celestial dragon blood. While Shanks is still an incredibly mysterious character well over 1000 chapters into the story, we have through the years learned several key things about him. But I'd next want to highlight one thing in particular. Shanks' entire character doesn't just revolve around Roger and Luffy, but it also very much revolves around Joyboy. The straw hat Shanks originally got from Roger and gave to Luffy is incredibly similar to Joyboy's hat, but an important detail to note is that even though this hat was clearly treasured by Roger, Roger gave it to Shanks when he was just a kid. In the Oden flashback, we learned that Shanks has been wearing this hat as early as the age of 9, which would imply that Roger very early on saw something in Shanks that made him think he was more worthy of the hat than him. Shanks is also incredibly connected to the sun god Nika fruit, where Shanks has deep connections with the giants who worship Nika, and Shanks later personally stole the devil fruit from the world government. And finally, Shanks has spent his entire life looking for the One Piece, which as we know, is not actually Roger's treasure, but Joyboy's treasure. Right after Roger himself returned from Laugh Tale, he also told Shanks something mysterious that made him cry. While it's never actually been literally brought up in the story, there may be a connection between Shanks and Joyboy that goes beyond Shanks simply being a character closely tied to Roger and Luffy. What we've also learned in this current Elbaf flashback is that the other Roger pirates call Shanks the Child of Destiny, despite Roger's crew having at this point already been to Laugh Tale, and having learned that the next Joyboy had not yet been born, and therefore could not be Shanks. This would mean that even though he wasn't literally the next Joyboy, there was something else about Shanks' birth that made him special. Something that could have made even Roger give him the straw hat when he was just a child. I'd next like to bring up one final point before I actually try to tie all of this together. And this is the fact that we have never actually seen what color Joyboy's hair is in the manga. We have now seen Joyboy multiple times in the story, but his hair color has every time been conveniently silhouetted. Normally, this wouldn't really be a big deal, as One Piece characters' hair in the manga is always initially shown as either black or white. But as brought up before, Shanks' family is literally the one exception, where they're the only characters whose hair color can be distinguished from the original manga. So, here is the theory. Shanks may literally be a direct descendant of Joyboy. What Garling could have discovered on God Valley was that Joyboy's bloodline still exists hundreds of years after his death, with Shanks' mother being a descendant from Joyboy. Garling having made this discovery on God Valley of all places would also make a lot of sense in the context of the story. The Kingdom of God Valley was a country unaffiliated with the world government, which would mean that it was a natural place to harbor the government's long-forgotten enemies. This is something we've also seen several times in the story, where countries unaffiliated with the world government have many times been revealed as the homelands of people they've tried to erase from history. The name God Valley in itself is very telling, as we also know that during the Void Century, the Lunarians fought against Imu on the side of Joyboy, and were literally known as the gods of their time. This is also noted in the story, where the Celestial Dragons thought that God Valley's name was a sign of insolence, as they naturally saw themselves as the only gods of this world. Even more interesting is that God Valley is located in the West Blue, and there is a very good possibility that this sea itself is also somehow connected to Joyboy. This is because the song Pink Sake literally comes from this sea. The lyrics of Pink Sake not only have a very strong connection to Joyboy, with it being an old pirate song singing about things like the sun and the dawn, but to make the connection to this topic even stronger, Shanks is one of the few confirmed characters who knows this song. So, let's say that this is actually true, and that Shanks' mother was a descendant of Joyboy who'd been hiding on God Valley. Would it actually make sense for someone like Garling to want to father children with her, instead of just killing her? This is actually a question that can be answered with a resounding, inarguable yes. The reason for this being that this is how the world government has literally always operated. The government does not just want to erase the ancient kingdom from history, they also want their power as their own. The government has spent years trying to get their hands on the ancient weapons. They've literally cloned races like the Lunarians and Buccaneers to serve as their obedient soldiers. They have members of the D clan serving in the Marines. They do not want to destroy, but instead to conquer and use countries who fought alongside Joyboy like Wano, and have had others like Fishman Island join as member states of the world government. The government has even spent centuries trying to get their hands on the Nika devil fruit, and as brought up before, even Marie Choice is literally built on the lands of their enemies. The government to their core is pretty much obsessed with taking the power of their enemies as their own. Imu on Elbaf even word for word says that this is how he likes to do things, where he doesn't just want to erase the giants, but to subjugate them. Where the idea of Garling wanting to father children descendant from Joyboy gets even stronger, however, is that the celestial dragons were literally introduced with this very idea. All the way back in Sabodi, it was revealed that the celestial dragons like to bed people from the lower world, and to have children with them. The fact that this is something the celestial dragons frequently do has only become reinforced deeper into the story, with harrowing examples like what happened with Ginny. So, surprisingly, it is actually completely in character for Garling and the world government to want to do something like harness the power of Joyboy's bloodline as their own. And as Garling says, this is likely something that would very much please Imu. It would also make sense why Garling would have wanted the native hunting competition to be held on God Valley of all places, where it could have been his plan to completely wipe out any trace of his children's homeland, so that they would be better converted into 100% devoted celestial dragons. What would also be interesting about Shanks being revealed as being Joyboy's descendant is that it could finally explain why Shanks is so naturally gifted. Shanks' immense talent is noted several times in the story, where it for example was so great that it made Bucky give up on his dreams. And Shanks was also noted to have been the only member of the Roger pirates who was able to copy Roger's fighting style. I would however even go a step beyond, and go as far as to say that Shanks pretty much is the most naturally gifted character in all of One Piece. The reason for this is that Shanks is not only one of the handful of characters who has reached the pinnacle of power without a devil fruit, but he also did this even after losing his dominant arm. In every flashback scene we see of him, Shanks always wielded his sword in the arm he later gave to the Lord of the Coast. Losing the limb you rely on in combat is massive in One Piece, where it was brought up all the way back in Sanji's flashback that even a legend like Chef literally had to quit being a pirate after losing his leg. For Shanks to have been able to get this far after having lost his dominant arm very likely hints at him having immensely powerful genetics that set him apart from all other characters in the story. Even freaks of nature like Roger and Garp, who didn't rely on devil fruits, still at least had all of their limbs intact, and didn't have to completely reinvent the way they fought midway through life. Shanks being this much of an outlier would however make perfect sense if this was a power he'd inherited from Joyboy's bloodline. I think another thing that would make more sense if Garling did indeed father children descendant from Joyboy is why Shamrock is supposed to be such an important character in the story. For context, Shamrock is in fact not just important because he is Shanks' twin, but he was presented on the page at the very end of Vegapunk's message, alongside some of the most influential characters in the whole story. But Shamrock's importance doesn't stop there. If you're interested, you can click here to watch a video I made last year, where I break down why Shamrock very likely is also the lurking legend talked about by Oda years ago, which by Oda's own words means that he will in the future become one of the biggest enemies Luffy has ever faced. This build-up in my opinion goes way beyond Shamrock simply being Shanks' brother. but Shamrock being this important would still make sense if he also carried the blood of Joyboy and could therefore also be a child of destiny. All of this also brings up a very interesting question. If Shanks indeed has Joyboy's lineage, does Shanks himself know this? I actually think there is a good chance that he does. After Roger's execution, Shanks' life took an interesting turn, where he actually started forming up his relations with his biological family, where we know that Shanks actually visited the Holy Land at this point. On top of this, Shanks also started becoming friendly with the Giants, who themselves also have a deep connection with Joyboy. As Shanks himself said, the years after Roger's execution had turned his life upside down. The end result of all of this was that Shanks ended up stealing Joyboy's devil fruit from the government. I think it is very possible that Shanks in this period could have been trying to figure out both his Joyboy and Celestial Dragon blood, and what this all meant for his place in the world. What possibly supports the fact that Shanks values his lineage so much is that Shanks' hair color is clearly very important to him. He is not only called Red Hair Shanks by the world at large, but Shanks even named his own pirate crew as the Red Hair Pirates. Pirate captains in One Piece often name their crews based on a core part of their identity, such as Luffy calling his crew the Straw Hat Pirates based on his most treasured item. If this theory is somehow correct, I would also still like to ask one more question about it. What is Shanks' true name? Unlike Garling and Shamrock, Shanks has never in the story been called as Vigarland Shanks, and if Shanks for example were to want to renounce his Celestial Dragon side, it could be that Shanks did what Ace did, and personally uses the family name of his mother, which if this theory is correct, could be literally the same family name as Joyboy's. Still, I might have to throw some cold water on this idea, considering that Joyboy's death and Shanks' birth are events separated by over 700 years in the timeline. It is possible that while Joyboy's bloodline could have survived, the family name vanished long ago with the passage of time. I suppose one way this could be possible is if Toki was actually an affiliate of Joyboy during the Void Century and did something like send his children forward in time, which in theory could even make it possible that Shanks and Shamrock were the literal grandchildren of Joyboy. For one more crazy twist to top everything off, Joyboy's straw hat was seemingly huge, which could indicate that he was not a human, but a member of a larger race like the Buccaneers. So, if you want to believe that Shanks and Shamrock are Joyboy's descendants, they too could possess Buccaneer blood, though not enough for them to be seen as full-blown Buccaneers, as Saturn already revealed that Kuma was the sole survivor of his race. So, in a quick summary of this idea, Garling could have discovered that there was a living descendant of Joyboy on God Valley, and then decided to sire children with her, so that the world government would gain the power of Joyboy's bloodline as their own. Shanks could have then later discovered the truth of his lineage, which could have led to him seeking out things like the Nika fruit and the One Piece, and this could be the very reason why Shanks is called the Child of Destiny, despite not being the literal next Joyboy. This would also explain just why the red hair of Shanks' family is given such huge importance in the manga, why Shanks is so immensely gifted, and why not only him, but also Shamrock are set up to be so important in the story's endgame, where these could all be literally explained by Shanks and his brother carrying Joyboy's blood in their veins. It is a rather interesting detail that Garling allowed Shamrock to keep his birth name, despite seemingly later raising him in the Holy Land. I actually think what could have happened here is the same thing that happened between Roger and Rogue, where even though Roger wasn't around, he had told Rogue to name their son as Ace. This would actually imply that despite what some of you may have thought, Garling did not assay Shanks' mom, but instead genuinely courted her. This however does not mean that Garling is in any way a good person, and I think it reveals that he is in fact a complete monster. Basically, Garling could have played nice with Shanks' mom, as he knew he had to wait 2 years for the native hunting competition, so it made sense for Garling to ensure the mother of his children cared for them before the government attacked God Valley. This whole storyline honestly paints Garling as not just a really cold and Machiavellian character, but one of the most despicable characters in all of One Piece. He literally came up with an idea to commit genocide in a country where his children had just been born. If you thought Saturn was morally bankrupt, I think Garling is more than filling his shoes already. Speaking of Saturn, we actually know that he participated in the God Valley incident, and this is just a random idea I had. But what if he was the one who placed Shanks in that treasure chest? This may sound odd, but we now know Saturn was one of the few people who knew of Garling's plans, and we also know the original elders do not exactly respect Garling. So, it could be that Saturn was just looking out for his own butt, and made sure that Garling brought him only one child instead of the promised two. It's just a random idea, but it's also kind of a funny meme at this point, if Saturn's entire career basically filled with moments where he unintentionally sabotaged the government. I also think this chapter didn't just unveil Shanks' birth, but there's also another moment in this chapter that I think 100% hints at Blackbeard's birth. This is when Sebek is gleeful about something that has recently happened to him, and his crew is convinced that it is about a woman. The dead giveaway that this is about Blackbeard is that this is the exact year in the timeline when he was born. Teacher's mother must have genuinely been quite a lady, since she was able to have a kid with Sebek at a time when he was in the midst of being wild for Shaggy. If Blackbeard's name is any indication, his mother was also a member of the D clan and from a family called the Marshalls. It could also be that this mother was a pretty evil character, since I think Blackbeard is actually considerably more evil than Sebek, where at least Sebek is able to genuinely like people like Harald, whereas Blackbeard just sees everyone as tools, which is potentially something he inherited from his mother. I also do think that, like Shanks, Blackbeard's lineage from his mother's side is also massively important, where the Gorosei have already confirmed that Sebek did not eat multiple devil fruits, and Blackbeard's River card in turn has confirmed that he was only able to do this because of his body. Personally, I think Blackbeard's mother was literally a member of another race, but I'd like to make a full theory video on this instead of going into detail here, though as always, I have around 3000 other videos to make as well. While still talking about Sebek, the attack he did on Harald in this chapter genuinely reminds me a lot of Roger's divine departure. I think it would actually be pretty cool if Roger literally copied this move from Sebek, just like how Shanks later copied it from Roger. Divine departure to me pretty much 100% matches the description we got from Sebek's fighting style earlier in this flashback, where it is an attack that blasts everything from its path like a cannonball. I also gotta say that I'm a huge fan of Roger in this backstory, even though he's in the middle of his journey looking for the One Piece. Just like Luffy, Roger is taking his time and enjoying the detours of his life, whether it's pining for Shaggy or just messing around with his crew. Roger and Rayleigh also at least to me give a clear big brother and little brother dynamic in this chapter, which does make sense since they've known each other since forever, and Rayleigh is actually a year older than Roger. Rayleigh also shows himself to be a complete natural at playing the game, which I think makes his relationship with Shaggy even more endearing, since Rayleigh is just being himself instead of even trying to game her. What's actually super surprising based on this chapter is that this is the one thing where Luffy turns out to be more like Rayleigh than he is like Roger. Just like Rayleigh, Luffy in no way wants to be tied down by anyone. I guess this must also literally be the type of man that Shaggy likes, since he passed Roger, yet immediately became a fan of Luffy's after meeting him at Sabaody. This is also probably why Rayleigh and Shaggy made for such a good couple in the end, where Rayleigh apparently regularly goes missing for months, yet this does not bother Shaggy, showing that she respects his boundaries. The more I'm talking about him, the more I'm starting to think that Rayleigh might be the biggest Chad in the whole story. Aside from maybe Katakuri's dad, Rayleigh basically won the heart of the Miss Universe of the pirate world, and then got into a relationship with her on his terms. I think it's also really endearing that Roger even at this point was fond of Whitebeard and wanted to drink with him. It's also interesting that even Big Mom was cool with Roger during this era, where she apparently only started to hate him after Roger years later got in the way of her dreams. This kind of mirrors Big Mom's relationship with Luffy, where she was also initially interested in him at Fishman Island, but then came to despise him after the events of Whole Cake. One final point about Roger is that we've now reached the point in the timeline when he reached the end of the Grand Line, as Roger sailed to Lodestar Island 39 years ago, the exact year when Shanks was born. I know I keep saying this in my videos, but this is also when something happened that made Roger later want to come to God Valley. It could just be that he came there for Shaggy, but I'm kind of hoping for a bigger reveal that is somehow connected to Lodestar, While this is still supposed to be Loki's flashback, the only thing I have to say for him based on this chapter is that I am pretty sure this is the first time Loki has said a kind thing to Ida. The dead flags on Ida are so big at this point that I will be stunned if she is actually still alive in the current story, since Loki apparently developed some kind of affection for her. I also wouldn't be surprised if Ida's character is later used to bring Oden and Loki together in the present timeline. Now, as for the cover story, I just want to say that I want full credit for predicting that Moria was Wano's mysterious hero, where I said it all the way back in the exact chapter this hero was first brought up. Maybe this hero is literally Moria, as we know he was born in the West Blue, and conveniently, seemingly knew that both Ryuma's corpse and sword would be located in Ringo. Not that I even care about getting predictions right, to be honest. Moria being a Kosugi is honestly a great twist in my opinion, and makes Moria a much more interesting character. The lore we got on him was that he was born in the West Blue, but was still raised in Ringo, which to me has to mean that there was a member of the Kosugi clan that went sailing the world even before Oden, because we now know that Moria's true family name is Kosugi, and because we know the Kosugi clan was all but extinct before Sukiyaki's birth. This basically has to mean that Moria's father is Sukiyaki's younger brother and Oden's uncle. If Oden's uncle was an explorer who went out to sea, I think he was also very likely also the man who originally inspired Oden to go out and see the world. Still, the biggest character this twist impacts is naturally Moria himself, as it puts all of his actions in a new light. I actually think this could all paint Moria as being a patriot who loved Wano country, where it is possible that he fought Kaido to try to liberate Wano from his rule. It is also possible that this continued to be Moria's goal, where he didn't just want to gather zombies for revenge, but was always planning to free Wano from Kaido. While him stealing Ryuma's corpse and sword may look bad, Moria might have also seen these things as a means to an end, where he would have later used them to defeat Kaido. Now that Kaido has been beaten and Wano has been given back to the Kosugi by Luffy, it is also very much possible that Moria will forgive him for what happened in Thriller Bark. So this may all well be set up for a future alliance between Luffy and Moria. One question some fans may ask is why the people of Wano think Moria is dead, when he's clearly still an active pirate. But this is more than likely because most of Wano country didn't receive any news while under Kaido, and even though Momo, Kinemon and Raizo traveled outside Wano, they were pretty much constantly on the run, and probably didn't have the time to read the news. So, basically, it could only be a matter of time until Momo or someone reads the news and realizes that cousin Moria is still alive. I do wonder what happened to Moria's dad, however, since no one has ever brought him up. It is also possible that he and Moria never really got along, as Moria left Wano at an early age and didn't use his true family name. One crazy twist to top everything off is that Moria in his youth was taught the ancient language, and that he is one of the very few alive characters who can read the poneglyphs. Moria had already left Wano in his early 20s, as we saw him at Roger's execution when he was just 26, but that still makes it very much possible that he was taught the language before he left. I also kind of want this to happen, since it would be so hilarious if Moria of all characters became a key for the One Piece. I talked a lot in this video about both Shanks and Blackbeard's very special lineages, so if you're interested, definitely click here to watch this video, where I go over why Blackbeard and his mother may be from the Buccaneer race. Huge thanks to all my members for supporting the channel, and thanks to everyone else for watching this video to the end.